Phillip Mahnken. I started my career as a student of Indonesian at ANU, 1971. Became a teacher back in Tasmania. They gave me a scholarship to go to ANU. So I was a teacher of Indonesian and French, and occasionally roped into social science and English and looking after lockers from 1975 till 1990. And then I was asked to come to the University of Tasmania and establish the Indonesian program there because they had a grant which I had helped put in for, and because they stuffed it up, they couldn't advertise it properly, and they said, hey, our education faculty often seconds people from the education department, would you come and get it going for 1990? And so I stuck to them, and I'd say it was very successful, and I was at the Uni of Tas then on a more permanent basis till '96. I shifted to Queensland to the University of the Sunshine Coast involuntarily, thank you John Howard, in 1997. And I had 70 people in first year that I offered it there. And then about 30 in the second year and a dozen or so in the third year. And the Dean at the time actually said to me, you better start looking for somebody else as a second lecturer in Indonesian. As the Howard era went on, and the Bali bombs and the war on terror and the Chappelle Corbys and everything else, my numbers went down and down and down reliably year after year going down. And I have, when I left the uni the other day, I had 16 lined up to do first year Indonesian this year, which means that I have 2 in second year and 2 in third year, and for the first year they're going to tell me this year you simply cannot offer them. It's totally uneconomic. We've been carrying this for a few years now, so they must go to Richard. You know, go cross-institutional to another uni. Now, I have a great relationship with Richard Curtis, so I send anybody to CDU who I can't cater for at my uni. And part of the reason why the numbers are down is because I really strongly encourage my students to do in-country study, either at our Lombok intensive 6-week program or off to a semester in Achichis. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second if I have the time. About Achichis and my own university's refusal to rejoin. We were a member for 3 years. The Dean dropped out to save money. The Dean told me to set up the Lombok program. That same Dean is now PVC International and is saying to me, want you to walk away from that Lombok thing. We want to send them to Universitas Kristen Satya-Wacana. What for? I've not been told. I presume it's got something to do with deals, with money, with maybe full fee paying overseas students or something, but I'm resisting it. When I think about it, I think my entire career, for what it's worth, at universities from 1990 to now has been funded by special project grants. As I said, the Tasmania one was set up with a special grant, the Australian language something or other back in those days, in the heady days of Keating and Evans and Dawkins. And then at the university I'm at, we had the RUILI, the Regional Universities Indonesian Language Initiative, which was about 369,000. About 169 of that came to USC. They like you if you're bringing in grant money. As soon as that was over and done with, I was invited by the Asia Education Foundation to work with Michelle Kohler from the Uni of South Australia on a report on Indonesian in schools. It was only 45,000, but more or less do it on top of everything else you're doing, and it brings, you know, what looks like research income into the school. And then just recently I've been delighted, and I think it's actually, it's not meant to be for this, but it's actually saved my discipline at my school to get a $308,000 NALSUP grant for a project we call Head Start to Indonesian, and that is a big copy of Pam Allen's work in Hobart, recruiting year 11 and 12 students to come to university on full scholarships, full HEC scholarships, and study Indonesian. And since I did a PhD in computer-assisted language learning, and I quite like all that techie stuff, we will deliver it 3 hours on campus and 2 hours online. So one of it will be live online lesson with me, and one of it will be self-access to all the multimedia stuff. And I just find that an interesting thing when I think back over these last 2 decades, that really most of my career has been propped up with special grants. And were it not for that, my own supervisors would be taking the accountant's ruler to it and fobbing me off, I think. And the point of all this is that Indonesian studies has never really been normalised. That was a word, Michelle. Are you here, Michelle? Somewhere? Cola? That was a word.
She rang to say that she was ill.
Right. She used this word, it's never been normalised in schools or universities. It's always something a bit special, and it has these fits and starts of popularity and then back to the old Australian who gives the toss. And, well, some of the advantages, to be positive, some of the advantages are that the former DVC, now Vice-Chancellor of my university, who himself did 15 years of geography type research in Indonesia, has himself told my dean, you may not get rid of Indonesian. And, you know, occasionally to get an article in the paper, I sent it, the digital version, around to a few people by the Vice-Chancellor saying, I love Indonesia, I stand by Indonesia, this is invaluable PR. Somebody else wrote me an email and said, oh, nice to have friends in high places. And in a sense, were it not for him, I'm sure Indonesia would have gone. And there's a lovely community of Indonesian people who hold occasional social events on the Sunshine Coast. These sort of things help to some degree to keep it alive. And the presence at long last of us Indonesian postgraduates on the campus. The Sunshine Coast may have 60 different ethnic groups in its composition, but it's also visibly a haven of white Australia. Our campus has at best 2 or 3 Indonesians or Malaysian students for most of its existence since '97. But now I myself am involved in the supervision of 3 Indonesian PhD students. One of them is the most invaluable person, is Untung Waluyo from the University of Mataram, and it's been his personal dedication and hard work that has really made the Lombok program something of quality and something to be proud of. And there's a few other PhD people doing interesting things. We also have on our campus now for about the last 3 years a thing they call the International Projects Group, IPG. I call them the Ikatan Perempuan Gila. And they have a special interest in Indonesia and in fact in Papua, and they've won several large AusAid grants to bring groups of Papuan teachers to the Sunshine Coast for 13-week professional upgrading programs. So, and the IPG, the manager, is a graduate of my program, Susie Burford. She did politics and business as well as Indonesian. And she won the Chancellor's Medal the year she completed honours. So it's good to have people like that around. Other alumni from the program, and you know, they occasionally get newspaper coverage of what they're up to with their Papua group. So it's all good to keep Indonesian in the mind of the community to some degree. Alumni at our university are, you know, some shining examples of success, and wherever I can I invite them, or I write about them, or I put them on the website or something, like Dave Gilbert, who is now the Eastern Australian and Southeast Asia manager for Ausclad, who are a company who provide all sorts of engineering services for mining companies. Michelle Story at the Department of Defence. Tracy Williams went straight from USC to mine rehabilitation work in Kalimantan, so she had science and Indonesian. Nathan O'Leary, just this year been accepted into officer training for intelligence with the Army. And teachers, there's half a dozen people who have become teachers. So I refer to these role models and graduates from Achichis, from USC, from Lombok and others whenever I do promotion work in schools and the community in my university. And I have come to believe that PR is what we need. You know, we talk about communicative language teaching, but I do think we languages teachers in Australia, especially Indonesianists, we've had it hard. We've had Howard and all that period, but we're not very good at communicating that core message that everybody here so deeply believes in. And if our human lives are so much determined by the prevalent discourse, then our only way to effect that deep cultural change that we need is to sally into that discourse forcefully and seriously, I think, apply all the techniques of advertising and public relations. I've been jotting down ideas for years, and we're going to have a special session on that, I believe, David. So I have the same problems everybody has at universities. I have basically people who are very powerful in the university who are just members of the Australian public when it comes to Indonesia, like school principals, like mums and dads who advise their kids how to choose what subjects in schools. They are grossly ignorant of Indonesia. They don't know that Australia is just 1 hour's flying time from Indonesia. And a lot of them wish, you know, they go along and watch films like The King's Speech. We are deeply, deeply saturated with European and American-loving, American cultural products in this country. So we actually fight against that all the time, and I actually have people smacking me down when I try and do promotional things sometimes, and that's deeply frustrating. So I better finish off and say that this is, I'm 57, Jeff talks about retirement, and about the only thing in some ways that saved me from a lot of stress in the last couple of years is thinking 60's not that far away. 60's not that far away. But what I want to do with that 3 years really, above all through the NELSA program, is do an enormous amount of work with schools and see if it can come up with a kind of a handbook of PR for Indonesian that stays on and lives on. I've talked with people about doing comic book type things. I've been working on films for the last couple of years, and of course in curriculum and pedagogy you never stop going over it. We have a complementary course at my uni called Indonesian Society, Culture and Politics that I've taught 3 or 4 times, and Greg Paulgrave has been brought in thanks to grant money. And I suppose the most proud achievement I have is the Lombok program. If you want your students to do 1 semester in 3 weeks or 2 semesters in 6 weeks, it is immensely valuable. It's about half of an Achichis stay. So if you come to Lombok twice, it's about the same as an Achichis stay, David. And you know, we get phenomenal feedback from students from that program, and we will be talking about current achievements in one of those sessions. And I should say, to finish optimistically, to my utter surprise, despite Jeff saying, you know, that there's 2 Indonesian schools in Brisbane, only 2 teaching Indonesian and 2 only on the Sunshine Coast, and bugger all else in Queensland. I'll be taping this. There's a bunch of Queensland teachers from Toowoomba and Brisbane and elsewhere who've just got together and having Saturday meetings once every couple of months and are forming an Indonesian Language Teachers Association of Queensland. And their spirit gives me spirit too. I think that's just wonderful, and they're fervent and they believe in what they're doing, so I'm going to be helping them as much as I possibly can.